Hi, everybody. My name is Ronnie. I am the former, as of a month and a half ago, Chief Digital Officer of Almosafer. And first things first, I'll get out of the way. I know it is 7 o'clock or 7:10 p.m., and I'm sure most of your brains are shutting down at this point in time after getting all this information. So from my heart to yours, I genuinely appreciate the fact that you're still in the room and still trying to listen. And I do hope that whatever I share here is something that is useful that you can take away. Now, it's interesting, in all the previous conversations, there was really, really amazing information that was shared. And what I'd like to present, even though I'm a digital person or a technology person, is to talk not about technology or about digital, but actually to talk about some very fundamental principles and mental models that should hopefully make everything that we talked about make some sense. And this is really for anybody, right? It really doesn't matter whether you're a product person or tech person, a CEO, a director, whatever your objective is, this is a mental model for solving problems that I hope you can take away from today. So this is the concept of transformation to drive innovation. And transformation is a topic that a lot of companies and a lot of you hear it in the news all the time, right? We're in the world of generative AI now, and believe me, I'm one of those people that as soon as to me, AI is a bad word. I hate hearing it. I hate hearing generative AI because my first question, when my CEO used to come to me, and at the point where it became super popular, when it got into news, he started bothering me and my CTO and saying, hey, so what are we doing with AI? And my question back to him was, what problem do you want to solve with AI? Stop telling me to go implement a solution. Tell me what problem you want to solve. And that is the premise of everything I want to talk about here today. So in the process of innovation, there's a simple concept about building what I refer to as a learning organization. And innovation is really a process of continuous learning. And everything we talked about in terms of data, customer research, what is all that really about? It's a collective form of learning that a group of people go through together, and they will take those learnings and apply it to solve specific problems. And so for me, it's about creating a safe environment where people can actually learn. So a few things that I hope you guys will take away today is this paradigm. It's a mental model about building a learning organization, understanding that there's a process that a group of people can apply together in order to create that learning environment and that learning process. And then finally, I'll give you some specific examples that will kind of hopefully help you remember how that would actually look like. So by the way, none of this is original. I just read a lot, I study a lot, and about 7 years ago when I took over my role in the company that I was in, it was a small little startup, and I was asked by the CEO who hired me to scale an organization. And I very honestly told him at that point in time that I don't know how to do this, because I've never scaled an organization of this size. So what did I do? I knew that I didn't have to figure it out on my own. There's really, really smart people out there who've done this before multiple times, and one of the people that I went to who wrote a book at that time was a book inspired by a gentleman named E.K. Probably one of the best books that I've ever written, the concept of product management and building product to solve valuable problems. Then he went on to write another book called Empowered, which taught me how to be a product leader. How do you build teams that can actually solve these problems? And then recently he wrote a book called Transformed, which is how do you transform an organization to operate in this way? I went from studying his work 7 years ago to most recently, Almosafer was a case study in the book Transformed on how to actually apply this process. I never in my life thought that I would end up being a case study in a book written by one of my heroes. And that was actually one of the most proudest moments where, oh my God, this is pretty crazy. And that's Marty Kagan there on the left. He's a partner at a firm called SVPG, called Silicon Valley Product Group. And the reason why I'm sharing all this with all you guys is because there's much smarter people out there than me that you can go learn from. So I'd like you to take all these resources away with you and apply them wherever you go. We actually had his partner, Christian Idioti, come and work with our company probably about 6-7 years ago now and teach us how to apply these principles within our organization as well. Because a lot of it is about learning and then applying and experimenting with it. So more books. I won't go into the details here. You guys can take pictures of it or grab the presentation after. Hope Gurian, here on the left, was my leadership coach when I didn't know how to do my job. So I actually went to a person who knew how to do this really well, and she coached me on this, and she taught me. And she told me every single mistake. So I would make a ton of mistakes and go back to her and say, I made this mistake. And she would help me learn from my mistakes. And she gave me a safe place to vent and to share. And for her to then, let me cry on her shoulder. I did a lot of crying, believe me. And having a coach like that for me was really, really powerful and really, really helpful. And it also taught me as a leader that my job as a leader for my team is to be a coach as well. And all of this, as I was learning it, was about teaching my team how to do this as well. So why should any of what I have to say actually matter to you? So Almosafer is a booking website. So we sell flights and we sell hotels. We're essentially the booking.com of the region. Booking.com, you can think about the airline websites that you book from. If you've ever booked on the Emirates website, you will know that that's not a fun experience, even though it's an amazing airline, by the way, but they don't exactly build great digital products. And we started, like I said, in our first year, the way that our company operated was we had a very, very smart CEO and COO and chief commercial officer. And their premise of building our business was, hey guys, go and copy booking.com, go and copy this airline website, and localize it into Arabic. And we were lucky enough to be a Saudi company with a lot of funding behind us. So their strategy was copy this website, and then let's pump a lot of money into the market to acquire customers. And if we were a regular startup, we would have failed miserably doing it that way, because we would have run out of money and we would have never gotten a single customer. But for them, because they were able to buy customers, they were able to manage it. So I joined them in year one, and it was at that point that the CEO and COO basically came up and said, okay, we're running out of ideas, right? There's nothing left for us to copy. There's nothing left. And they kept giving the teams ideas to go and build, and the team kept building things, and they were releasing features, but nothing was actually moving their numbers up anymore. How many of you guys can relate to that, where you're building a ton of features, releasing a lot of things? I see at least one hand up. There you go, Chip. There, yeah. You release a lot of things, your teams are working extremely hard, but you don't feel like there's any difference being made, right? And so we went through a transformation experience of going from a startup to all the way to what I call a learning organization, where we did all that customer research, all that experimentation to continuously try and drive and move a needle in our business. And there's a big part where technology played in that as well, where we moved from essentially a monolithic technology to a microservice architecture, which also enabled us to deploy and deliver things and experiment very, very quickly as well. This was the results, right? So in year one, like I said, we were a startup. We grew very quickly into $1 billion business just before COVID, and then COVID hit, and we essentially went almost down to zero. But because of this way of operating, even during COVID, we actually launched a brand new product that kept us in business. And then when we came out of COVID, we ended up being an organization that had 75% market share, right? That's the level to it. And this is not just growth. This is growth with profitability. We're profitable, or I should say they are, since it's not we anymore. But this tells you the results of operating in this way. So how was that really achieved? It was from the concept from what's called a feature factory, where you just come up with a backlog of features and you keep releasing it, to what is called an outcome or impact-driven team, or what's called an empowered team. And what does that look like? This is usually how most teams work. Someone comes up with a bright idea. That bright idea is then written into a form of requirements. The requirements are then handed over to a designer. A designer designs the solution, basically a nice little prototype, or not even a prototype, just an image of it. An engineer takes it, builds it, it gets released into production, right? And it's when it has been released into production that anyone asks the question of how is it performing? And anyone knows that $250 comma that we saw before is the perfect example of, okay, so it cost us $250 to release that comma. It took us 2 weeks. But then if it's after that $250 in the 2 weeks that we're asking, did the comma actually make a difference? That is a waste of money. And that's a waste of talent too. You have smart people that if that's what you're getting them to do, and you only measure whether that comma made a difference after you put it on production, you're wasting your time. And you're getting out of money. So what's a different type of model? Now, I'm not going to walk you through this because I'll walk you through the example, but this is a concept called dual track agile, where you do discovery and delivery in parallel. And that's what a learning organization really is. So how does this normally work? And I don't know how many of you can relate to this, but how many have a CEO or some C-level or some stakeholder, or how many of you are that stakeholder in the room who goes to your team and says, hey, can you please increase revenue for me? Right, there you go. It's at least, my friend, I appreciate the fact that you put your hand up and you admit to that. And then you hold, and then you hold your teams accountable when they have no idea how to do that, right? And these are some, and Dilbert, by the way, is my favorite comic because it is truth in a funny form, where the first example shows, the simple idea of you've asked for features, and then you have that stakeholder say, okay, yeah, one more feature, make it easy for people to use, right? And then there's a second one, which is a massive failure of a product, right? And then, of course, who gets blamed for it, right? This is the classic thing where you have a stakeholder go and ask a team to go and deliver something, and they're the ones who gave them the requirement. The team delivered it, and then usually what happens is they measure the result, and then they blame the team for the shitty result. This is, again, a very classic story that I'm sure many people can experience. And the dreaded roadmap, when every team is measured not based on what is the outcome or impact they drive, but they're measured by how many things are in your feature roadmap, and did you deliver those things to the timeline that you committed to or we expect to deliver to. And everything is defined by just output. How much did you deliver in a certain period of time? So when we either have this business objective or a feature request, what's the inherent problem? So here's an example where you go to the team and you say increase revenue or increase retention, and then the team sits there saying, okay, what feature do we build? This is the idea phase. People come up with ideas, guessing at what might actually shift revenue. And people go out and build a bunch of stuff, deploy it, and then they start tracking this big metric like retention or revenue to see whether it's actually changing or not. The opposite side of that is that they will come with a feature request, or your stakeholder or your team will come up with a feature, and then they're usually sitting there scratching their heads thinking, okay, we're going to build this feature, but what problem are we really solving? Right? What is the value that we're creating? The mental model that I want you guys to think about is what is that happens in between, right? And so a fundamental definition, the problem with this approach is you can actually build a perfect feature, a feature that is to spec, highly scalable, perfect in every way, and it makes absolutely no difference. And you leave, what you end up with is basically a bunch of really depressed people, right? People who show up to work, they're doing a lot of work, and you usually end up with angry stakeholders who are wondering, why am I paying these people money? Because they keep coming to work and they're really depressed, and they just don't seem to be making any sort of a difference. So what's that missing link? So this thing in between is the thing that will connect the two, and that's something which is referred to as a product outcome, right? And I'll define for you guys what a product outcome is and how to actually find one. So what is this thing from this really good book? An outcome is any kind of user behavior that by changing that behavior leads to a measurable result. This is the level at which that your teams can actually do something impactful. And innovation is, again, a very simple concept. It's actually about solving valuable problems for your customer in a way that matters for your business, right? That actually will drive value for your business. But it always starts with your customer. Because if you're not solving a valuable problem for your customer, then why are you in business, right? I mean, yes, we all know why you're in business, to make a profit. But if you're going to guess at what's going to make you a profit, your customers aren't going to stay with you. And a lot of companies, by the way, that are well driven by smart business leaders that will get up to a certain size, but then get stuck. They get stuck and they can't grow further because they're still just coming up with ideas and they're not focused on actually solving customer problems. So there's, again, and I think, by the way, I was really appreciative of Slava and when he was sharing, because my heart was really feeling for him, because there's, again, a mental model about the art and science of solving these problems, because it's both art and science. When we talk about qualitative and quantitative, but let's define what is qualitative and quantitative. There's 4 things that as a business, this is not as a product team, this is actually as a business that we're constantly trying to solve, which is what is the value or what's the customer problem we're trying to solve? Can we solve it in a way that is actually useful to the customer and actually solves it for them? This is the how. Can we build it in a way that is scalable and cost-effective? And finally, does solving this problem actually make money for our business? Right? It has to make money because, trust me, customers will ask for a lot of things. And solving that problem for the customer isn't going to help you build a sustainable business. So it's important that both of those things have to work. So this concept of a product outcome connects those two things. The customer problem is your value problem, and your customer behavior is your usability problem. When you answer those two things, you're able to connect what your business impact is to the feature that you're trying to build. And everything here is about what is the process you can go through to build what I refer to as the right thing in the right way. If you go back to your teams, and if you go back and do some retrospectives in things that you might have released and didn't make any impact, you can actually retrospectively see and answer this question: did we build the wrong thing? Meaning, did we solve the wrong problem? Or did we solve it the wrong way? And you can actually learn from that experience. So you can start by asking these 3 magic questions. And these 3 magic questions come from that book, Outcomes Over Output. The first one is, what are the human behaviors that drive those results? Right? What are the human behaviors? What's the behavior? And I love the example that Chip said about the payment one, right? There was a behavior that was happening that there might have been an opportunity with. And they were able to go and explore that and then leverage that to create even further outcomes. The second one is, how can we get more people to do that behavior? This was essentially what you said. It's like, hey, can we drive more people to use Apple Pay? And then the last one, how can we know that we're right about these assumptions that we're making? Because we're not quite sure. And there's a process that we can go through to actually validate those. This, again, comes from a phenomenal book called Continuous Discovery Habits. And this is a model that we used called the Opportunity Solution Tree. And the Opportunity Solution Tree is, again, a mechanism and a learning model that a group of people can apply together. So how does that look? You start with, at the top, what is your business impact or your outcome? And then what you're trying to do is you look through your data to find correlations of behavior, right? Where is it that we have opportunities in our data? From there, what you have to go and do is then answer the question of, okay, we see opportunities in our data, but why is that actually happening? Because the why is about the problem, and the why is about the behavior, like what change in the behavior you actually need to drive. That's what then should lead you to running experiments, not building features. You run experiments to validate whether your assumptions are actually true or not. That should eventually then lead you to building a feature. The feature should be the last thing. And all of this, what is it meant to do? It's not going to guarantee you a perfect outcome, but it will increase the probability that the bets that you are taking will have a higher chance of success. Because that's what every organization is. They're making bets. There's a limited number of time. There's a limited number of resources. There's a lot that can be done. And what you're supposed to be doing is picking bets that have a higher probability of success. So I'll take you guys through an example of this. So our flights product, like I said, people come, book a flight, right? Book Emirates. And now we were what's referred to as an OTA, an online travel agency, which is different than an airline website. So on an airline website, for example, if I go to Emirates, I know I'm booking an Emirates flight, and the only results I'm going to see there are Emirates flights. As an OTA, a customer would come to our site, and we're going to show them all the different airlines between 2 routes, not just the single airline. So they were given this wonderful, business metric of increased revenue, and the behavior that we measure in any e-commerce website is conversion rate, right? Is as customers are going through your funnel, are they converting at every step of your funnel? So this was their business metric. And then we went through and started looking at the data. So what do? This is an example of what's called a user story map. And a user story map is essentially just your user journey, and you're looking at the data across that user journey, right? All the way from, someone wants to travel, they come and use an app, all the way through every step of the funnel. And we actually measure every single point at which people are exiting that funnel. And what we look for is we look for something called a high leverage point. A high leverage point is a place where there's a huge opportunity. Another thing about a high leverage point, and it was also described before, what is something that by doing a small change can create a big leverage effect, a major change? So we found a high leverage point that was when people run a search and see results, we saw about 20% of those users were exiting on the results page, and another 60% of users were going back, and they were rerunning a search. So this was the behavior that we saw. This is what the data was telling us. But even though that's what the data was telling us, we didn't know why it was happening. We didn't have context behind what was the user's problem. And that's where we didn't know why. And believe me, most teams will see this, they'll look at the data, and the normal process is they will go to that page and they will come up with 50 million different ideas for what they should run, and they will guess at what is going on, right? And then you'll still run that. You might have a good idea of where the problem is. It might limit your effort a little bit, but you're still doing a heck of a lot of work and hoping for the best, right? There's this thing that we used to spray and pray, right? We just launch a bunch of stuff and pray to God that something's gonna work, right? And so there's this concept called the theory of change, which is what is the customer problem and what's the problematic behavior. So when we went to that particular part of the page, and this is another really, really interesting thing, I get a pet peeve that I have is when people come and tell me what they call an insight, which is really not an insight. And someone said it before too, an insight is something that is actionable. It's not just information. And the number of times that my team used to come to me and give me pieces of information, I'm like, how does that help me? The big question is, so what? Why are you telling me this information? And there's this, again, a journey to insights. So we used to do continuous customer interviewing, right? And I remember when I started with this company, I didn't talk to a single customer, right? And then we began by running quarterly customer research cycles. Then we eventually got to a place where every single one of our teams was talking to customers on a weekly basis. On a weekly basis. At least 2 to 3 customers, and they were doing all different forms of research and discovery. They were doing problem discovery, they were doing solution discovery, where they were testing prototypes with customers, just to see how did customers like it? How did they perform with it? How did they end up using it? What was their opinion of it? And this is what gives you the rich context of why a problem is taking place. So, like I said, it's a unique moment that can actually drive some sort of a behavior change, which again, drives some form of a result. So this is, again, another way that you can look at it is going from data to information to findings to finally an insight. And I'm going to walk you through an example of that, which is we had this flights product. They had to increase revenue, increase customer conversion rate. We identified one problem, which is customers were telling us that they preferred booking on the airline website, right? Okay, that's good. We can understand why. Why do you want to go book on the airline website? One thing that they said is, well, because we think that the airline website is actually cheaper than you guys. This actually wasn't true, by the way. They weren't cheaper than us, but customers thought that they were cheaper than us. So when we went and looked at another thing is that we saw the behavior that customers were going back and forth, where they would see the search result and they would go back to the previous step. When we actually interviewed customers and asked them why they were doing this, they said, well, what I do is I go back and I rerun searches on different dates to see if there's a cheaper date to travel. Because I'm fairly flexible in my travel. I don't need to travel on this date. And they would say that they would go to the airline website because the airline website would actually give them multiple options on different dates. So they already had a view of when would be a cheaper date to travel. That's why they went to the airline website. So we knew that we had the right problem to solve, which is let's help our customers find the cheapest date to travel. But we didn't know how to solve it in the right way. Now, how did we cheaply test this with our customers? We didn't have to build anything. We decided essentially to take our competitor websites, use their, essentially, and the concept is there's this thing called a fare calendar, or there's different ways of visualizing what's the cheapest date to travel. And we didn't have to build a single thing. We just took our competitor's website and put it in front of our customer and said, use it, right? Use this and tell us why it's gonna work for you or why it's not. And by the way, what's interesting about interviewing customers is don't ever ask a customer what you like about it or what you don't like about it. Instead, watch them behave. If you watch how they behave, you draw insights from them by watching their behavior. Another one is don't ever ask a customer, what would you do? Because when you ask them the question of what would you do, they go into a hypothetical imaginary space in their head, and they give you what they think is the perfect thing to do. Instead, ask them about an instance in the past when they had to do something and ask them to describe that experience to you. Then they go back into their memory bank and they tell you from their memory what their experience was like, and they will give you way more real problems of what actually happened. Which is why never ask a customer what they want, because they actually don't know what they want. But if you ask them about their experience, you can pull out what their problems really are and then solve on their behalf. So we put this in front of customers, and our big thing was, wait, aren't we just copying somebody else? Like, does this really solve their problem? So we went through this process once more, and we started seeing some insights from our customers, which is, one, they were changing dates to find the cheapest date to travel. We tested these cheap prototypes, but these were two really, really powerful insights that we got, right? One is, customers said that they wouldn't want to use the fare calendar because we showed all the airlines, not just one airline. Customers were telling us that, yeah, but I wouldn't use your calendar because the cheapest price you're showing me is a shitty airline I don't want to fly on. So I'm going to click on this, I'm going to go to your search result, and then it's going to be some crappy airline, and then I'm going to be pissed off, right? Because the real flight I want to travel by is way more expensive than what I saw here. The second thing that they said is, similarly, the cheapest flight is probably a flight that has multiple stops. And I don't want to travel by multiple stops. I want to go by one stop, or I want to go with nonstop. This was an insight, because suddenly we knew what they wanted was the cheapest flight with no stops with the airline that they wanted to search by. So what this changed in what we built was we built a more complex solution, because the way that we needed to build this was to build a fare calendar, you have to cache multiple prices, right? And the original fare calendar would be a single dimension cache, meaning that you run a date and you just have the cheapest prices for all the airlines on that date. What we had to build was what's called a multi-dimensional cache, which is you had to build a cache that actually had all the airlines and the cheapest price by all of those airlines on multiple dates, and also for all the multiple stops. So it was more complex. But if we hadn't done this, we would have probably built the original just normal fare calendar and launched it, and we wouldn't have seen it perform. And we wouldn't have known why it didn't perform. But because we knew these insights, we spent a little bit of extra time actually solving their problem. And so essentially, to the customer, this is what it looked like. It just basically, on the fare calendar, had two filters. Number of stops and which airline. And that would update the calendar with the cheapest price that they were looking for. Now, what did this actually lead to in terms of impact? So this is genuinely what numbers we saw. We saw a 30% increase in conversion rate just by adding those two filters, right? On desktop, so in iOS, which was our largest platform, that's the number that we hit. And on desktop, we 20% in conversion rate improvement. Again, these are unheard of numbers if you're just guessing at the things that you're going to do. But if you're solving actual customer problems and changing behavior, these are the types of numbers you can actually achieve from just these basic insights. Quick filters, this is again, really, really high performance numbers, like 20+% improvement in conversion rate. Now, this is the other thing too. It doesn't stop there, right? It doesn't stop from the first iteration. Then we went back and we kept looking at user behavior with the cache that we built. Something that was really interesting that we noticed is that because we were filling up the cache based on user searches, meaning that customers would come and search on our website, based on the dates that customers were searching for, we would fill our cache. So there was a lot of times where customers were coming and searching on a date or searching for a period of dates that no other customers had actually searched for, and they would see a calendar that was only partially full. So it would have some dates. And so we'd have these parts where to click on a spot to actually fill up that price. And again, what do we find out? Oh my God, okay, this is not good for customers. And we did that because caching stuff can be costly, and running searches can be costly as well. But when we learned that this was happening and we weren't seeing the conversion rate numbers, what we started doing was automating a lot of the searches in the background and not just depending on user searches. So we could pre-fill our caches for customers based on what we saw the windows that people were booking for, right? So again, making a tech decision based on understanding how people behave and solving their problems. And this is, again, like phenomenal performance numbers that we saw, right? In terms of the improvement in conversion rates after, and that again was iteration, right? Just because we built and launched the first thing doesn't mean you stop there. You can keep iterating on that particular solution to understand what new problems they're facing, and you can keep optimizing. The first solution that we built is it's still an optimization, but I would call it kind of an innovation because there was no other OTA that was doing that at the time. So we really pulled a lot of customers and acquired a lot of customers for providing something nobody else was providing. The second set that we did was what I would refer to as an optimization. We took something that was already there, kept learning with it, and then kept improving on it. And so, once again, this is this same simple mental model that I want to give you guys. And this is really a way of defining everything that all the other experts today have talked about. One thing I will add to this. During COVID, when everything shut down for us, what's interesting was we had no data to analyze anything. So what do you do in a situation where you actually don't have data to analyze? And what are those situations? Situations where you're a startup and you just don't have customers yet. Situations where you're trying to enter a new market, which means you don't have data in that new market yet, or it's actually a brand new product that you're trying to launch. So during COVID, we leaned a lot on customer research. And one of the things that our customers told us through our research is, well, we're not spending money on flights and hotels anymore, but in Saudi, there's this concept called astraha, or it's a right, where families would book basically a property where their families could get together, and it's not even an overnight booking, it's an afternoon booking. They'll book from about noon until maybe 2 in the morning. And what straha means is it roughly translates to gathering, right, or gathering place. And people were spending their money to booking these things, these particular properties. There was no digital solution that existed for it. So during COVID, we took a big bet, decided to go and build a digital booking platform for strahas. And we saw customers flock and start booking with us, right? And again, that was from just talking to customers and trying to solve a valuable problem and seeing a change in behavior that was happening in the market where we had no data to actually look forward to. The powerful thing about this process is you will have a leadership team, you will have a marketing team, you will have an operations team, and a product design and tech team that are all aligned on trying to solve the same things together. They just look at it from different perspectives. And that's, like I said, we went from having very depressed people coming into work to having some really, really happy and excited people coming to work. And that's why people like me stuck around there for 7 years, because I loved going into work. And most of my team that I hired and were with me for the whole 5 or 6 or 7 years. And that, again, to me was pretty unheard of, that people stuck with me and stuck with our team for that long, applying this learning process, and people grew along the way. And if you want to grow from a startup to a scale-up or a billion-dollar company, you actually need people to stick around with you for a long time. You really do. You need people who want to be loyal and want to keep coming in every day because they understand your technology, they understand your customer, and they understand your market really well. And some of that can only come with time. And if you want to retain people, you should also think about operating in a completely different kind of way. So that's about as much as I think I wanted to share. And finally, like I said, learning doesn't stop from the first iteration. As you keep iterating, that's how you get to grow your team, you get to grow yourself, and you get to grow your business too. So thank you.